funny, embarrassing, and also sometimes upsetting. We've had the union finance minister here recently, a couple of weeks ago. She went to a fair price shop in a district about 100 kilometers from here. And she was making a scene out there like a street level BJP worker, asking the collector right in front of about 200 people as to where the Prime Minister's photo in the fair price shop was. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, if we are truly a federal republic, as we are supposed to be, why are we fighting over an individual's pictures and in the institutions that we've built at the grassroots level? I mean, if I can certainly counter it and say, you know, when Modi ji was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, did he put up Dr. Manmohan Singh's pictures in all the fair price shops in Gujarat? I don't think so. The point I'm trying to make is, none of our enactments, none of our legislations actually mandate this kind of cult worship. What has essentially happened, Yamini, in my humble opinion, is, while we are called the world's largest parliamentary democracy, we function like a presidential democracy and not like a parliamentary democracy. Essentially, everything being centralized. And this applies to states as well, by the way. I'm not saying this only about the union government. I'm also saying the same thing about state government. Even the states, as Rajendra said, we do also, in fact, barring Kerala, probably, I think we do not empower local governments enough. We don't empower our local governments enough. So, yes, what you do is sometimes what you get. Karma is a boomerang, like they say. But the point is, we need to, at some point, draw lines, clear distinctions, and say, okay, now let's define our roles, the defense, railways, and there are certain areas we have simply no role. That should be left to the union government. And what is the union government doing today with respect to Narega? They want to deposit funds from the Narega kitty directly into the workers' account in a village. Now, do the states not get to decide what sort of work needs to be taken up? Kerala may have done some things. Telangana may have done some things. Tamil Nadu would want to do something else. And Andhra might be wanting to do something else. We are all on different stages of learning curve. Now, this is the essence of federalism. Trying to ensure that we understand stronger the states are, stronger the country is going to be. Each state needs to align its priorities in tandem with its local governments. In Telangana, we run a program called as Palle Pragati and Pattan Pragati. Today, when Government of India is rated the top 20 best villages in the country, 19 are from Telangana because of this program. The point I'm trying to make is, when we are operating with a focus and when we are trying to up our game, all the union government needs to do is encourage performance and leave it to us to decide what central sponsored scheme that we need to participate in and what we can opt out of. If that sort of flexibility is given to us, as opposed to thrusting things down our throat, I think then we truly will become a strong nation, and as Prime Minister calls it, Amrut Kal and Achhe Din will come fairly quickly.
Flexibility in centrally sponsored schemes, PTR, do you think that's part of the menu of solutions to reimagining the federal compact?
Yeah, I'm not even clear why we should have centrally sponsored schemes as opposed to giving the money to the people, right? I have a video clip picking up from my friend of then Chief Minister of Gujarat, Thiru Narendra Modi, going on a long exposition. It's in Hindi. I can play it here if you want. He says, Mama ka paisa. Yeah, he says, you know, he says the states have been feeding the poor for decades. All of a sudden the union comes and says, this is coming from me. What does that mean? All these things, right? So I think there are some clear roles for the union. Foreign affairs, defense, currency stabilization, you know, trade, policies. But when it comes to what is right, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. You've seen so many CAG reports, not our reports, CAG reports that talk about Swachh Bharat scheme toilets built with no water because the union government cannot supply water, only the local body can supply water. Or funds sent and not used because you cannot whitewash a thatched school. And, you know, this notion that somehow you can direct or dictate policy. And then the question then is, what is the intent? Is it to create a kind of cult? Is it to, so, you know, we have an insurance program, or for that matter, PDS. In all of these things, Tamil Nadu was certainly ahead of the Indian average or the design of the union scheme. Then they design a scheme, and then they say, you have to change the name. If you want some share of it to be funded by the union, you have to change the name. We have an insurance program. They want to partly fund some of it. They say you have to put the Prime Minister's image on the card, on the ID card. I mean, we were already doing it before. Now, you get some. So, and I'll go even to the extreme in terms of schemes, right? Like they have the scheme called Jal Jeevan scheme, right? And it started out with, 60 or 80-20, then 60-40, then 40-60, the usual model, sliding scale. But they incentivize you to actually take the tap into every house in every village. Now, in a lot of cases, the villagers don't want the tap in their house. They have their own, mores and their own psychology about it. They want a public tap on the street. In my constituency, in colonies where I've offered to run taps into the house, they say, no, leave the tap outside my house, not inside my house. But the scheme says you only get funding if you take the tap inside the house. Right? This last mile delivery, why should there be a standardized model coming from Delhi about last mile delivery? Different people have different preferences. That's what the states exist for. That's what the local bodies exist for. Now, as far as the local bodies, I definitely take my friend's comment because, he has, unlike me, he has served as a sarpanch at a local body level. I completely agree with the lack of devolution. But it's a double-edged sword. In the case of Tamil Nadu, a lot of our problems with local bodies have to do with the caste problem. And it has to do with no matter what you do about reservations and all that. Once you get to a granular level where within the same geographical area, you reserve this as let's say, a SC seat, but there is a whole lot of non-SC people there. You start having caste problems, and there's been violence and murders and all kinds of clashes and stuff like that. So my colleague, I'm also the Minister for Planning, my colleague, the Vice Chairman of the Planning Commission of Tamil Nadu, says the single biggest improvement in delivery of services and the equality of society in the rural areas of Tamil Nadu was when the line department started driving the programs rather than the local body elected officials. Because if they did that, it was very biased, and even letting out the temple lands and managing the tanks and all that, they would do on a caste basis or a communal basis or a religion basis or something. And once you standardize the model from Chennai, then it became actually better delivery. So I completely agree, you can't have it always. You can't say, I want devolution to my level, but not below me. And again, I think time changes things, right? If you have greater education levels, you have greater integration, more harmony, then you do more devolution. And I think some states, and maybe there's a correlation between the communist philosophy and the fact that Kerala has such high devolution, maybe. But
I think all parties take equal credit for that.
but some of these things should never be aggregated. There is no natural reason for a one-size-fits-all aggregated model coming from Delhi. That's my idea.
I think one of the big governance challenges for India is that we still haven't passed out what level of government should be performing what level of function, and it leads to a consistent set of overlaps across the board. I was going to pose the next question, but you've thrown such an important provocation about local governments and the local context that I think, Ms. Reddy, you have to answer that. Because if I at the risk of making a too broad a statement out of your somewhat more nuanced point, would it be right to say that the inequalities at the grassroots level should necessitate a little bit more centralization from the state? I'm just throwing this out as a provocation because I think that's one of the very critical reasons why you could, centralization at the state level has often happened at the cost of deeper devolution to local governments.
These things, Yamini, I feel are very state specific, with in acknowledgement and also due respect to the opinions of my colleagues here. Transgression of responsibilities and duties, overlaps, normally happen vertically. Now, the duty of a local body representative, a sarpanch or a taluk board president is well defined. But the MLA wants to go and see what all is happening, right from laying of drains to roads to water. This is clearly the role of a local body.
And the MP also with the MP-led
The
fund.
MP also. And now, MLA is transgressing into the local bodies, Parliament is transgressing into the legislatures, so is the result with regard to local bodies, legislatures and parliament. Next comes whether there should be a more centralized monitoring and spending. I believe that in a democracy, ultimately, it is the elected representative who should have supreme power. He is elected by the public. If the public do not like his whatever capacities, there is always a provision to replace him when the period ends. But I have in my own experience seen that anybody who is elected by the public have a far better understanding of the needs of the public than anyone else in the system. And now when it comes to the expenditures that are made, now I, belonging to a state as well as to a regional party, at the same time, to be fair and be objective, the money that is being spent by the center for the schemes, central sponsored schemes, are outside of the money that is already devolved to the states. So, when the center spends certain amount of money on CASDS, centralized state development schemes, or the centrally sponsored schemes. So, centrally sponsored schemes are 100% spent by the center, and CASDS are partly spent with contribution by the state. So, these are framed in such a way based on the requirement. Now, as Mr. PTR said, there are state-specific, and as Mr. KTR also said, state-specific needs are there where maybe the CASDS have to be, the states have to be given a little more autonomy to design schemes that are more suitable for their requirement. But at the same time, broadly speaking, when the center is spending money for the public, if the state wants to have its own emblem or own mark or trademark, so also we should allow the center to do it.
Okay, can I just interrupt for sorry to interrupt. My point is very simple, very straight. I agree with you and I don't have a problem with centrally sponsored schemes either. The problem arises when somebody tries to impose their ideology. The issue is not centrally sponsored schemes or the larger good that is aimed at for the betterment of the society. That is not a problem at all. See, between all of us, the southern states, we are 19% of the population of this country, but we contribute to 35% of the GDP of this country. So when somebody from Delhi flies into Hyderabad and tells us that I am the giver and you are the taker, you know the attitude that kicks in, you know that हमने आपको 2 lakh crore दिया. Now that really puts me off. Because, you know, every rupee I contribute from Telangana, my exchequer contributes from Telangana, what we get back is 46 paisa. For every rupee that is contributed from the south of India, 35% of the GDP, we do not get back. I'm not even asking, I'm not even suggesting that I get back every single paisa. I know that there is defense, I know that there is railways, I know that there are laggard states, I know that there are roles that the government of India needs to fulfill, which of course we are happy to contribute and we are happy to, you know, as an Indian citizen, we are happy to, you know, be a part of the nation building. But the problem is the attitude of those who run Delhi. You know, they come with a chip on their shoulder and they tell us, listen, हम देने वाले हैं, आप लेने वाले हैं. तो इसीलिए हम जब देते हैं, हम जो कहते हैं, whatever we say, you have to do. Now that is the problem. Because Andhra has a certain challenge. Andhra has certain, you know, projects that they would like to complete. In Telangana, in the last 8 years, we have completed drinking water connection to each and every home. In fact, that became inspiration to Har Ghar Jal. In Telangana, we have done some very, very focused programs on tank revival. In Telangana, we've also completed some large lift irrigation projects. So I have a different set of priorities from my friends here. Now, why should I not get to decide what I should do with my devolution money and with also my money that is being proposed in centrally sponsored schemes? The last thing I'll say is, you know, this whole myth about devolution, how it has been enhanced by Modi ji. Actually, the fact is, both the finance ministers can tell you, it is not 41% that we receive today. Because of all this cess and other things that is happening, we only get 29%, which is far worse than what it was. So this whole, again, abrogation of sorts of responsibilities or, you know, this obfuscation that they indulge in, you know, and kind of try and take away the money that rightfully belongs to the states by way of imposing additional excise duties and other things. It is a travesty. So this needs to be challenged. This needs to be addressed. And if needed, it needs to be challenged legally as well.
In fact,
So as Mr. KTR said, the actual increase in devolution and more autonomy to the state happened during the 14th Finance Commission while Dr. Y.V. Reddy was the chairman. Because the 14th Finance Commission felt that states ought to have more autonomy and independence into doing what they want with the money, and it need not be dictated by the center. But unfortunately, that 42 finally now comes down to only about 30%, 10% lesser than what we are entitled to get for various reasons, cesses, etc., etc. But then coming to the issue of center state, I think this relationship between center, state, federal structure, etc., has to happen from top to bottom. It cannot stop midway or start midway. It has to start from top and go down up to the Gram Panchayat level. Only then everybody understands what the actual responsibilities are, what the actual authorities are, and what the duties are.
Sorry, I just want to say one thing about the centrally sponsored schemes. I mean, I'm relatively new in politics, but 15th Finance Commission Chairman, Mr. N.K. Singh, at some seminar we were at, he said there wasn't actually this whole, it wasn't like a constitutional carve-out that there should be centrally sponsored schemes. Certain governments started it when states benefited and they still had a say in its design, and it was a participative kind of approach. They didn't object. This regime has just taken it to extremes and made it dictatorial and, to suit their political needs as opposed to the needs of the people. But it's not like inherent in the constitution that there should be centrally sponsored schemes. It's not like they're particularly well designed to execute anything. I mean, as I think former Chief Minister of then unified Andhra said, the union is a myth, right? It's an integration of all the money that comes from the states, politicians that come from the states, IAS officers that come from the states, IPS officers that come from the states. It is a temporary gathering of people to facilitate the distribution, redistribution, devolution of what comes from the states. It's not like it drops from the sky to the union and then they divide it up to us, right? So this notion that there should be something that they know better than us itself is a flawed notion, right? There's no natural place for them to have this. And I mean, listen, I'm far, far less strident than the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, Narendra Modi, when he said the same things when he was Chief Minister.
Well, when they abolished the Planning Commission, they should have got rid of the centrally sponsored schemes along with it, maybe.
No, but I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that came from that. In fact, when KTR was talking about how much money Telangana gets back on the taxes it pays, historically, the South has been subsidizing the North. There's very little doubt about that. And other states, I remember Mr. Siddaramaiah, when the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission came out, he pointed out that for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by Uttar Pradesh, the state receives 179 back, whereas Karnataka, rather like Telangana today, received 0.47. And he says, how long can you keep incentivizing population growth? Now, this ties into the question of central assistance because it's again striking, and this is not from him, I was doing my own research. Karnataka meets 72% of its expenses from its own state taxes, whereas Bihar meets just 23%. The remaining 77% comes from central allocations. So, unlike most other federal systems, India's revenues go disproportionately to our worst performing states. And those are usually states with poor levels of education, high rates of fertility and population growth. And the South, where these things are done better and there are high-performance states by any yardstick, thereby get short shrift, which is actually going to the heart of the issues of federalism. Because if indeed, as a result of the federal system, you're subsidizing the poorer performing states, in principle, no argument. But if the way in which it's done seems to reward lack of performance, population growth resulting from that particular misgovernance in some of these states, and those who are performing well get penalized. In other words, if Kerala runs much better health outcomes and much better educational outcomes, its reward should not be to get less money from the Center for Health and for Education. But that's de facto what's happening. And this remains a serious problem, it seems to me, and goes to the heart of the whole question as to why many of the southern states are talking to you. I do want to join the others in congratulating the organizers for getting these fine minds from the South together. I think I'm the only one from a non-regional party on this panel, but the idea is precisely that it's high time we woke up to the fact that the South has real concerns.
I just have one a provocative thought for the finance ministers and I think for all of us. You know, when we say federal, are we fully federal? Are we truly federal? You know, if you look at the United States, they're also a federal republic. In United States, you know, this whole question about devolution, you know, collecting taxes and then devolving, as opposed to that, why can't we think and why can't we propose a system where even the income tax, even the corporate tax is actually collected and, you know, deducted at the source? Why should we pay to the center and then go to Delhi and line up each of our finance ministers and, you know, I wouldn't call it a bowl of sorts, but, you know, kind of make a request, plead with them, and then eventually get our money back a few months later? Why can't we actually be a truly, fully federal republic and actually start collecting taxes at the source, including income tax and corporate tax?
To add to that, from a northern perspective, how do you then deal with the fact that growth paths have taken our country?
When I said that, I mean our share of the income tax and corporate tax. I don't mean the whole thing.
So, but I'm just going to throw out one element to this, which is the challenge of inequality. You have such huge convergence, such huge divergence, which all economic theory would have argued over time would have led closer towards convergence, but there's no sign of that convergence, and we still sit within the union. So there has to be equitable sharing. It is a very integrated economy, as we discovered in the times of COVID. The fact that labor and capital moves, it moves from the north to the south, so there is an interdependency. In some senses, it sharpens the federal, it's a sign of a sharpened federal tension, but also a sign of deepened federalism. So how do we balance these two tensions as we go forward in a fairly fraught environment?
Let me take the simple question first. Right? I mean, I think certainly we have many examples of societies where income taxes or direct taxes happen at multiple levels. So, you know, both KTR and I lived in the US for many years. The federal government takes some tax, the state government takes some tax, the city of New York takes some tax, the city of Los Angeles takes some tax, right? These are all independent of each other. So certainly at some point we have to say that the power of direct taxation has to be given to the states, whatever the constitutional need for that is. But there's a broader problem here. I think in no federal society are all people the same, right? Like economically, you'll always find better offs and less well-offs. The unique problem of India, and why I said to the 15th Finance Commission in my submission, written submission, I said, if equality and efficiency were the targets of finance commissions, then you all have been miserable failures for 25 years. Because every other society in the world, every other country in the world, the US, China, European Union, wherever, you take funds from the better off, you give it to the less well off, and whatever the measure is, it converges. You know, longevity, health measures, per capita income, education access. It converges. That's what the transfers are supposed to do. In our case, not only it doesn't converge, not only it doesn't stay the same, not only it's diverging, it's accelerating in its divergence. So the ratio keeps changing again and again, and still the outcome gets worse and worse. Let's just take Tamil Nadu's case. At one point, we were roughly 7.5% of the population, 7.5% of the GDP, got about 7% of the tax devolution, of that 32% that they devolved. Now we are less than 6%, I think, of the population, about 10.5% of the GDP, and we get about 4% of the taxes. That means for 25 years, these things have been going the wrong way, and we are not getting convergence. So there's something structurally wrong. And what's structurally wrong is not with us. What's structurally wrong is in those northern states where despite getting massive devolution, despite getting massive transfers, they are not able to improve the quality of people's lives, the average education access, or the social development indicators or human development indicators. So if your measures on which you allocate, you know the formula for the Finance Commission, some population, some gap to actual, all these forest cover, land and all that. Clearly they're allocating the money on the wrong dimensions because they keep on allocating more money and things keep getting worse. So there's something profoundly wrong in the developmental model of the northern states, particularly the Hindi belt, that unless that is fixed, no matter how much money you transfer, you're not going to be able to fix the problem. You can do politics with it, but you can't improve people's lives unless you find out what that is. And one I have written in my submission, one main thing they can fix is empower women, ensure girls stay in school, delay marriages, get them, better health outcomes, and they haven't done that. That's really, even a state like Gujarat that has slightly higher per capita income than Tamil Nadu, 50% or so of the girls around 18 are not in school. That's not true in any southern state, right? So there's something structurally wrong that money can't fix, that needs to be fixed some other way. Otherwise, we are just keeping on going the wrong way. No other country, no other union in the world has this bad an outcome.
I completely agree with him on how miserably they have failed in the north. But they come here and lecture us, by the way. You have to admire their temerity. You have to really admire their guts and temerity to come to the south, lecture all of us on how to run our states and how to actually administer, and how miserably we have done vis-a-vis them. When the fact is, all the indicators, no matter what you take, all the human development indices, all the social indicators will show you otherwise.
There is, I think what both of you are saying gets to the heart of the governance issue. And there is a lot to be learned. That's why federalism matters so much from what different states are doing. So the country learned from the midday meals. The country also learned from Bihar's attempt at giving bicycles to girls to try and bring them, get them to secondary schools. And in all of this, I think one aspect that we haven't talked about much is, and you brought it up in your initial remarks, the question of deliberation, that at the heart of federalism is the idea of coming together to dialogue, to deliberate, to share, to learn, and evolve solutions to these very wicked, hard problems. There has been, Ms. Reddy, if you can reflect a little bit on this, constant attempts in our history of trying to create these so-called sites of deliberation. The Interstate Council, which is now a punishment posting for the bureaucrat. The Planning Commission, everybody said, was filled with all kinds of problems. The National Development Council did not work, so we created the Niti Aayog. But then we left it to the finance departments, or the Ministry of Finance rather, to do deliberation with states. The GST Council, which was meant to be a site of deliberation, it works sometimes, it doesn't on other occasions. How do we think about this institutional question? Are we missing something? And what kind of space do we need for states to come together? The regional coming together, of course, is full of learning. The southern states coming together, the northeastern states coming together. But there's a lot needed for this deliberative environment to come together. Is it an institutional problem as well as much as it is a political problem?
I think it is both, Yamini. Of late, I think last year and this year, together we had two South Zonal Council meetings. I think they were quite well held, and we could see sizable outcome. Of course, I believe for a very long time, Zonal Council meetings were not held. But again, coming to the fundamental question is, are we a union or a federation? Now, I know it's very difficult not to be speaking for autonomy, not to be speaking in favor of regionalism or sub-regionalism. Because once you speak about unitary, then it becomes dry. But at the same time, India, is it a federation or is it a union? Even though we have certain elements or quite a lot of importance given to the federal structure, we are basically a unitary country. That is the reason that more of power we have to reconcile and accept. Probably the reasons at that point of time would have been different from many other countries. Now you look at Russia, you look at what's happening in the UK, you look at Spain. See, everywhere you have this sub-regionalism to such an extent that there is a constant friction between the union and the states or the independent units. So for India to be one, there are various issues where we have to be large-hearted and given. Now, for example, I'll take the case of northeastern states. They barely have anything for them. It is the duty of us to support them. So we have to, at some point of time, feel that probably we are more fortunate. And because of us being more fortunate, it becomes incumbent upon us to support all the states that do not have certain or have natural disadvantages. So it becomes difficult when we actually compare ourselves to the West and especially to the United States of America. See, there it is a federation, it's a clear federation. like Mr. Sheshi said in the beginning and Mr. KTR said in the beginning. It is basically a federation of states that were already there. Whereas we in India, at that point of time when we got independence, the complications were so huge. There were princely states, there were areas that were ruled by the British government, by the crown, and so many diversity in caste, creed, language. There are so many difficulties where unless there is some sort of a strong center and strong integration, it becomes difficult to hold on, I feel personally. Now, it becomes very nice to say that I am Andhraite, but at the same time, unless we say I am Indian first and then Andhraite, it is difficult for this country to survive.
No, I want to make a slight distinction here. It's precisely because I'm Indian that I worry that all the money is being thrown into a well and no development happens in UP. Right? It's not the money that I begrudge. It's that hundreds of millions of fellow citizens are not getting development, are not getting growth, are not getting access. So it is because of patriotism. I'm not saying I don't want to give the money. I'm saying we're, just like KTR said, we're happy to contribute. We are well off, we are lucky, we have been well governed, we are educated, we want to help. But we should get something that helps our fellow citizens. If we keep on transferring the wealth, then it keeps on going into, nothingness, into smoke. That's what we're concerned about. How do I say this? If it was just a zero-sum game that says who gets more, who gets less, etc., then it's a pointless debate. Why do we come to public life? We're not, just trying to, it's not like going to a casino and, rolling the dice, right? There should be some future vision of a better tomorrow than today. And that better tomorrow, it is hard to imagine a country where hundreds of millions of people get left behind, and yet there is a better tomorrow. They also must participate in this. And that's a state problem, but the union trying to dictate a one-size-fits-all as the disparity increases is an exercise in futility at best, or some kind of, megalomania at worst.
If I can just add a little bit to this. 42% was the devolution, vertical devolution by the 14th Finance Commission, and 15th Finance Commission actually made it 41. 1% going to the Union Territory of Kashmir. At that point of time, there was a lot of comment on why do we have to give that? But is it right? If we are not coming forward to give that 1% to an area, territory called Kashmir, on one point of view, you look at it from the state point of view, it might sound to be state advantages to the state. But when you look at it from the country's point of view, is it correct? That's my question.
Go ahead.
I just had one quick point. I've been a minister for 8 years. I've been a minister in the state for 8 years, and Honorable Prime Minister and his team have been in Delhi for the last 8 years. You talked about divergent India. You talked about how India is so different, how heterogeneous it is, how everything is different in northeast, west, east, south, etc. How many times has this government in Delhi made an effort to actually make us sit together? Because Prime Minister keeps talking about Team India. How many times has actually Team India sat together and tried to learn from each other? If Tamil Nadu is doing something very good in health, should I not learn from it? Should I reinvent the wheel? I don't think there has been a single situation where this government in India tried to actually say, listen, there are some good things that have been done in some pockets of the country. Why don't you learn from each other without reinventing the wheel? That has not happened. Second point, they talk about cooperative federalism. Lip service is fine. It's all nice to hear all these nice, fancy words. The fact is there cooperative federalism in the way they behave, in the way they actually operate? No, it is coercive federalism. That's what they actually, in terms of actions, that's what they actually deliver. Sabka saath, sabka vikas. Seriously? Has it been happening? Has it really happened? I don't think so. In fact, the last point I would say, somebody was joking when I was walking in. I was preparing because, there are some very, very sharp minds here. So I figured, I should prepare. And somebody told me, this Prime Minister, for him, GDP is not gross domestic product, but for him, it's only Gujarat Development Program. That's all he knows. That's all he understands. Where is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas in this country? It's all, Gujarat is the epicenter of everything. I'll just give you one example. In Telangana, we had launched what is called as the Hyderabad International Center for Arbitration and Mediation. with the help of some legal luminaries. We wanted this to be, we wanted to compete with Singapore, Dubai, London, and we wanted a lot of arbitration disputes to be settled here. The state would gain some revenue, will make it also an attractive place to do business, etc. What should the government of India do in such a case when the state actually launches something on its own? At best, support us financially, give us some backing. At worst, at least don't create something which will be a hurdle. And that's exactly what they've done. They've gone ahead a couple of months later, announced in Gujarat a new center with complete center backing, a new center which is contrary, which runs exactly contrary to us. So the point is, this whole spirit that they talk about, unless it translates into action, this country will never truly be a fully federal republic.
So at heart, it is a political, not an institutional issue. You want
Yamini,
to-
if I can intervene for a minute. Federalism, as I don't have to tell any of you, is not just about the fiscal. It's not just about the. It's not just about the fiscal space, right? As Justice Selmeswar pointed out in the morning session, for example, NEET. How does one common entrance examination work for a country like India? Tamil Nadu is fighting back what it feels imposition of Hindi, right? As representatives from the South, what do you think are the areas where the diversity that this country is known for is sought to be trampled upon?
So I think that question gets to the heart of where I think we should shift gear in this conversation, which is precisely this. The federal principle is also about accommodation. It's about enabling diversity to cohere. And in some senses, at least in the 1950 imagination, the strong center was part of precisely doing this. We've now come a long way from there. In this present moment, how does the centralization that we've all spoken about now sit with this need for accommodation, of the coherence of diversity, of the coherence of difference?
Well, I'm genuinely worried about this because you're looking at a situation where this precise logic that in a country, a union made up of divergent states at various stages of development, of literacy, of various human development indicators, there must be a sense that there is, if you like, the common nationhood that belongs to all of us should be a winning proposition for all of us. But now we're facing, for example, in 2026, just 4 years away, the lapsing of the 91st Amendment, under which the political authority in this country, that is seats in Lok Sabha, were allocated on the basis of the 1971 census, even though it was already 25 years out of date when Mr. Vajpayee renewed it. It was brought in again so that we wouldn't needlessly open up a situation in which the states that were performing well would be punished, as it were, for their performance in terms of reduced population by also losing the political power that comes with higher population. So that this became a rather sensitive situation. I know in democracy, one person, one vote and so on means that as some of our northern states have completely grown out of control in terms of population, they should be entitled to more seats. But the result is going to be a serious disenfranchisement of the southern states. And it's only 4 years away, and I think it's time we start thinking about it. So far we've been discussing money, fiscal allocations, those are real concerns. But what happens in a situation where, particularly with a fairly strong majoritarian party in power at the center, at the union government, which has a Hindi, Hindustan, Hindutva kind of agenda, how do we then see the southern states in a position in which collectively, for example, the South is unable to even prevent a constitutional amendment? If tomorrow, after 2026, the political representatives of the northern states have a 2/3 majority, what's to prevent them, for example, declaring Hindi as the national language, which many have tried to do, but have always been prevented from? These are also fundamental questions. There's a political dimension to the unitary impulse that I think we will have to confront sooner rather than later because it's just a few years down the road. There's the larger project, of course, we've got a building coming on stream where there's going to be enough seats for 880 people. Are we going to find our parliament being converted into some equivalent of the Chinese People's Consultative Chamber, where Mr. Xi Jinping comes in and makes his declamations, and these 880 or whatever thousand people there ritually applaud their tables, and that's about it in terms of meaningful debate? These are questions that I think it's time we start thinking about, particularly in the South, because the southern states are going to find that one of the rewards for their good economic performance, low levels of fertility of women, empowerment of women, education, and thereby lower population, that one of the rewards for that is going to be a loss of political power in the union. How do we deal with that?
Anyone amongst you wants to comment on
Well, I
this
think
really important point?
we have to collectively start campaigning and actually meeting more often and actually start making a case, because I think Shashi is absolutely right. We have, between all 6 states in the South, right now we have 130 Lok Sabha seats. But if that is going to be reduced by a large number, then I think the voice from the South, which has performed well, and for penalizing a performer, literally incentivizing a non-performer, is a travesty of all, in all forms. So therefore, I think we have to get our act together, cutting across, the various states. I mean, if I say too much, then I'll be called an anti-national. I'll be accused of being a secessionist and wanting a new country in the form of South India, etc. So I don't want to go thus far. But I'd rather say, under the larger rubric of India, I think all of us, like Rajendra said, we're all Indians first. We all love our country more than possibly, the people who run the country right now. But the fact is, yes, back in 1980s, when family planning was a big deal, South performed much, much better than the northern part of India. Now, you cannot penalize us. You cannot actually stifle our voice by way of cutting down the seats. I think we have to get together, cutting across political parties. Maybe in the next couple of months, we'll request our Honorable Chief Minister either to take it up in the Southern Region Council or otherwise. And I think this affects all of us. So collective voice is something that we
The
have
need to reimagine our federalism is now becoming very clearly a visible issue on the horizon.
Are there other aspects to this reimagination? There have been 3 issues that make their way into the national debate on a fairly regular basis. And I'd like both of you to reflect on all 3 of these. One is, do we need to go back to the union and state lists and reimagine the allocation of roles and responsibilities, both keeping in mind that there is a lot more integration, so things that states used to do now cut across state borders, so how do we manage that, as well as the fact that the union has taken over sets of roles that constitutionally were at the state level. The second question has been around the role of the institutions, like we talked about a little bit earlier, interstate councils, the absence of a planning commission. And the third issue of reform that comes up repeatedly is representation, not just in the Lok Sabha, but also in the Rajya Sabha, which was in some ways to be a representative of the states and doesn't necessarily play that role anymore. So is there scope, as we reimagine federalism, to also look at these 3 aspects of reform that come up, or is the national debate barking up the wrong tree?
I think whatever we're doing now is not working. There was an article a couple of days ago from Ratan Roy talking about getting larger versus getting richer. I was in Delhi for something, and at some media house, in the course of a discussion, they asked me, "Oh, are you very excited that India has become a larger economy than the UK?" I said, "Not particularly. I mean, if you tell me that the average citizen's life has improved, if they have better access to clean drinking water and, garbage-free street, that excites me. Multiplying some number by some other number and arriving at some scale, it doesn't really excite me that much." He went on to analyze it even more deeply, which is the point I want to make here, right? We have this perception that the labor from the poorer northern states comes and finds work and helps our economy. All true. But he made a point which I had not actually contemplated. Ever since I became the finance minister, I've been chairing the state-level bankers committee meetings every 3 months myself. Credit is such an important component of the economy in a country like India, where you don't have unsecured lending, you don't have deep capital markets. It's a technical thing. Now, But every single meeting, one of the things we look at is the credit to deposit ratio. It says how much is the total loan book in Tamil Nadu compared to all the deposits made by the people of Tamil Nadu. It is continuously above 1, right? So 1.05, 1.10, 1.13, something 1.09, which means effectively that the banks are bringing money from outside Tamil Nadu into Tamil Nadu and lending it into Tamil Nadu, thereby helping accelerate the growth of Tamil Nadu, clearly. I had not contemplated the reverse, and Ratin's article points out that the credit to deposit ratio in Uttar Pradesh is 0.55, even though it's a much smaller base. 45 paise of every rupee that UP people deposit into the banks gets taken out of UP and used somewhere else. That's clearly a retardant to their own growth, right? Now, nobody sets this diktat, right? The bankers go where the credit is good. That's true if you look at, World Bank or ADB or KFW or JICA. Southern states get a lot more of these projects, and the union tried to do something. It was misguided. They stopped it, thankfully. It was a technical thing. But nobody is that powerful that you can control the economy or the market, right? The market has its own momentum, has its own logic, its own rationale. People are sentient beings with their own preferences. So this is actually a great disservice. Whatever the model we have now, this model is a great disservice to those left behind. We should not contemplate all of North India as one block, or all of the Hindi people as one block, or all of the states as one block. Just because they happen to vote for a particular party doesn't make them that different than us, right? I mean, it's a different... I think we need to separate the person, the party, the outcome in the election, and the actual lives and realities of the people. And if we look at it from the lives and realities of the people, we don't actually have that much conflict. We all want the same thing. We all want everybody to progress, everybody to participate. We can't say we're for social justice in our state, but then we want only our citizens to progress and not the people of UP or Bihar. We want everybody to progress. This political dialogue around one strong man, one all-knowing, all-person being is obscuring these things. We need to separate these issues. And if this is 5 or 10 or 15 years is a blink of an eye in the evolution of mankind. So at the core, if we go back to the real values, that is that we want everybody to do well, to have a stake, to do this, then we have to reimagine all these lists. And that's for all states, not just for our state. All states should have greater freedom. All states should be incentivized with the right kinds of variables to deliver the right outcomes. So I definitely think I'm not that visionary or that experienced to know what the fix exactly is, but I'm 100% sure that what we have now is not working, and we have to do something about it.
Your thoughts on the fix?
As Mr. KTR said, when it comes to the relevance and existence of various states in this country, in the parliament, that is non-negotiable. There's no way that anybody is going to negotiate or give in. Fundamentally, the various states in this country have been formed on the basis of linguistic basis. Now, there's no way that Kerala or Andhra or Tamil Nadu or Karnataka or Orissa or Bengal or Maharashtra or Gujarat, nobody will compromise their position when it comes to number of seats or the actual political presence. That is one thing. So that, I think, when the appropriate moment comes, it is quite natural that everybody will come together and not let anything happen where their existence itself will be in question.
I think we've covered a very important set of issues that get to the heart of what federalism is. Federalism as a principle of accommodation, of holding together our diversity and representing our diversity, of being a principle which is about deliberation that helps us get through these very difficult challenges of a lot of divergence amongst us as states, and a lot for us to learn from as states. And the only way out of that is through a lot more deliberation, a lot more dialogue, emerging from which perhaps some of the reforms or the answers for this new imagination of federalism would come, because ultimately we are all coming together, as Shashi, you said, we are a common nation working towards a common proposition, a common purpose. We can open it up, I think, now for a few questions. We have about 20 minutes, am I right, boss? Yeah, for questions from the House.
Just a quick revision. Kindly introduce yourself and direct your question to the panelists that you would like an answer from. Thank you.
Great.
And please leave it to the moderator to choose the questions. I'm
Well,
sure.
there are three women right here who are asking
Sure.
questions, and I have to give them the space first. So, ma'am, over to you. It's South first means ladies first. Did we not hear
It is.
about all the great women's empowerment?
So, good evening, dignitaries. Pleasure listening to all of you. I'm Anuradha Tota, and good evening especially to KTR Garu. The question is about national education policy. I represent